Today we're talking to John Lurz about his book, The Barthes Fantastic Literature Criticism and the Practice of Language. John Lurz is Associate Professor of English at Tufts University, where he teaches courses in 20th century British literature and literary theory. He's the author of The Death of the Book, Modernist Novels and the Time of Reading. And welcome, John.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So am I. Let me just read to give people an orientation. I'll paraphrase the blurb here from the back cover. In The Barthes Fantastic, John Lurz explores the intersection of literature and everyday life through a reading of the work of Roland Barthes. Lurz shows how Barthes' insights involve particular intellectual activities that impart significance to the world. Doing so allows him to develop an expanded understanding of the fantastic as a conceptual category, in a category in which the texts we read come to inform the texture of our lives. Ultimately, the Barthes Fantastic enlarges our sense of what we learn as students of literature. I think that's a good. I was going to try to summarize it in my own words and say that. So I'm not a academic. And I'd say that if you read this book, first of all, you get to see Barthes' thinking, which is very stimulating, the way he says things. Secondly, you get to see your thoughts on other people, on not only on Barthes, but on what other people have said about Barthes. And I think there's also this sense that it's very practical. You're talking about you're talking about certain practices, and there's kind of a feeling of how do you understand your life? How do you make your life better through literature? Tell me.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And it's interesting that you have a hard time, or that you were sort of wanting to paraphrase and then finding yourself reading the blurb on the back of the book. Because I spent a lot of time writing the blurb on the back
Oh,
of the
did
book.
you?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's publisher who writes it, so I didn't know. Yeah.
Yeah, they asked me. Well, they asked me to do it, so I did it, and I spent a lot of time. And I sometimes have a hard, not have, I don't have a hard time, but my a lot of this book, a lot of the thinking got done sort of on the page, like in the
Sure.
sentences, in
Sure.
the. And so sometimes when I've had to, tell other people, anyone from, my mom, who's not an academic, to my colleagues who are, sometimes found myself tripping over my own formulations and wanting to rely back on these phrases that I've sort of, chiseled out very, very, very carefully. But your focus on how literature makes our life better is something that is motivating the book, but it's a phrase or a kind of approach that I don't make explicit or don't say explicitly, partly because I'm suspicious, or
Mm.
I'm not totally comfortable, or I guess maybe a better way to say is I didn't want this to be lumped into with like a self-help book,
Yeah, I understand. I
you
do
know?
understand that. I totally understand that. I like the way you phrase these things. Let me look here. There was one you talked about considering reality periodically as the raw material of a secret work.
I will say that's Bart's
Oh,
line.
that's Barth. Yeah, I didn't say whether it was you or him, but
Yeah,
yeah.
but I'll take it. Of course. Yeah, to think about the way in which our reality, or our sense of reality is maybe a better way of putting it. Our sense of reality is constantly being produced, or we are constantly producing our sense of reality, and and making that production, that work, that labor that we're so deft at, we're actually so deft at it that we don't even notice it, a little more explicit, a little more spelled out, a little more deliberate
Mhm.
deliberate excuse me, deliberate and deliberative,
Right.
oh, so this is how I'm making sense of this experience. And I'm aware that I'm making sense of it rather than jumping immediately to the the shorthand or as you were talking about in the email exchange we have, the sort of conventional ways that we assign meaning or make sense of things as
Yes.
quickly as possible to sort of get to the next thing or just get through the day.
Right, 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 right. I also thought in that it seemed that one way you talked about, well, okay, you're going to write this book, and I would think one of the, if I'm put myself in your position, I would think the benefit of writing this book is that I get to organize my thinking about Barthes, and I get to write about Barthes. I get to write
It's a,
and I'm produce. I have to. I like writing, and I like producing books, and so I get to read all. And this book, it's kind of like a way of getting exposed to Barthes because you see all of his different writings, and you're thinking about them. So that would be one. But I guess one also wants to know, well, what's the practical reason that I'm doing this? And it seemed that one way I liked it is you talked about, in terms of teaching, that you're trying to explain something that the students aren't quite getting.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I'm going to say two things in response to this. One is sort of like my personal motivation for writing the book was it was obscure and opaque to me for a while. It began really because I'd gotten tenure, which was wonderful, and I had
Congratulations. Yeah.
thank you. I had a semester leave after that, and I was like, "Okay, what am I gonna do with this leave?" But I was I knew what I didn't wanna do was write the book I said I was gonna write in my tenure application, which was a book about modernism, and I was like, I was interested in it, but I knew if I tried to write it at that point, I'd write the same book I as my first book.
Right.
And I said, "Well, what am I gonna do with all this very valuable time of not teaching that you have just
Sure.
to, like, be with your own thoughts?" And I was very much worried about it, and I thought, "I don't know," but I'd been sort of, like, stacking up a bunch of Barthes books just
Mhm.
to read at some point, and I thought, "You know, now that I have this job and they can't take it away from me, I can really think about what I want my career and what my want my intellectual life to look like." And maybe the best thing I can do is just read all of Barthes because if there's somebody I wanna model myself after,
Totally.
this would be a this I could choose worse, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just read all of Barthes that semester, and I thought,
Wow.
I don't know quite what I'm doing about this for, but something's gonna come of it." And so by the end of by the end of the semester of doing all this reading, the question of like, how do I want to organize my intellectual life had sort of blossomed into like, what is it? Why did I become a literary critic? Why did I become an
Mm.
academic? W- w-
Well,
What do I feel? Why do I feel so strongly about this? And can I use Bart or can Bart help me to be a little more concrete about what it is that I like about teaching literature, reading literature, and making literature sort of one of the centers of my life. And so that's really where the the intellectual and personal motivation came from. And then you asked about teaching. I teach across the 20th century, basically. And most of it is in modernism. I teach a Ulysses class. I teach a Virginia Woolf class. I teach a modernism survey. I also teach into the later 20th century. I teach a Booker Prize class. And especially when we're getting this happens all the time, but especially when we're getting into the later part of the century and sort of postmodernism is coming up and you're reading these novels that are sort of very self-referential and very
like you're reading Beckett, for example.
Beckett. Well, actually, really this happens when I'm reading Iris Murdoch's The Sea in my Booker Prize class, where she's really drawing our attention to the artificiality of and then the sort of performance of the novel. And the students get it. They understand what's happening, but then they jump immediately to like, so nothing means anything.
Yeah.
Like this is all a performance. And I'm like, no, 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 no. It's just that like nothing has to mean what you think it means.
Mm.
Right. And so then they're like, well, nothing means anything. Or then they're like, well, it's all socially constructed, it's all societal construction. And they want to stop there. And I
Yeah.
want to be like, yes, that's great, great. And they like this is like received wisdom at this point with these
Right.
students.
With
And so
everyone.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure out ways. to get them to realize that that's a place to start thinking rather than to end thinking. And I thought, can I give them other vocabulary to talk
Yes.
about what it means that all of our experiences are constructed by the social and the cultural and the linguistic systems that we live in.
Right.
That like they're like, oh, nothing's real. I'm like, well, it's nothing's real, but it's also still real. And
Right.
so
Right. Right.
you get you in this binary of like real and false, you get
Yeah.
sort of stuck. And so I
Right.
wanted to give them another term. You asked in the emails we were exchanging if I have been able to do this. I haven't yet. I haven't figured out
Okay.
how to bring it in yet. And I've learned better ways of sort of presenting some of this, but the sort of larger conceptual or theoretical thinking that I develop in this book is more implicit than it is explicit in my teaching at this point.
Okay. So I see you, as I'm reading, one's always thinking about what the author's thinking, right? And so I see you, well, first of all, in terms of choosing Bart, I think the other thing that you said when you had to pick something to do, you said you chose him. You somewhere in there you talk about the articulating energy that his language provides. And I just think it takes a lot of energy to write a book. I I mean, and reading Barth, it's like it just keeps coming at you. It's just
Mhm.
like, wow. So I don't know the way he phrases certain things. So it's a way of choosing a topic that's going to be giving you a lot of energy back to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And people, when I would tell people I was doing this, they would sort of give me a little bit of your reaction, like, wow. And then also like the other part of the reaction, like, what a pleasure that must be.
Yeah.
What a sort of like, it was like, eating like a bucket of creme brulee, over the
Yeah.
course of 3 months. And it was, you get these phrases that you're just like, wow. And
Yeah.
just to be able to kind of luxuriate in them and think about what they might allow you or me to do, to
Right.
think or to say based on them.
Right. So let's get into some of that. I'm going to use So one of the things said about that I learned in your book, I had only read like one quote from Barth before I read your book, which was something about he reads one reads literature as a codex of nuances.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah.
I thought so, but I one of the things is it has a fragmented methodology with an unapologetic foregrounding of his own subjectivity and resistance to conceptualization and orientation to lived experience. As those are features of his writing, which also are gonna affect you as you're
Mhm,
writing
mhm,
your own book of it.
mhm.
So, I'm gonna take this as an excuse to use a fragmented methodology and go from topic to topic. First of all, I really like your collages. I mean,
Oh, thank
um,
you.
so the book has these collages that you worked on while you did this, and you're you're kind of so you say it sometimes you say, "When I was doing this, sometimes it felt like a silly summer camp exercise." Well, what was it like? Yeah, just could you talk about your experience of it and putting it in the book? And
Yeah.
how you got the energy to do it?
Well, the energy came mostly from the fact that my social life in the pandemic, my social life had, been decimated. And I had this sense, I'm writing this book about how literature makes your life better, or I'm
Yeah.
trying to work through this. And I'm thinking, okay, here I am. I have all this time to really devote to literature and reading. But the thought of like working more than I was already working that I didn't want to do. So I was
No.
thinking, how do I use my intellectual life and these skills that I've developed over the years to at this moment to sort of sustain myself without
Mm.
being chained to my laptop and at my
Yeah.
desk. And I had been sort of cutting things out of periodicals and like placing them in a journal. And I thought, Well, what if I just kept what if I just pushed it further?
Yeah.
And I kept doing it and I kept doing it. At first, I was gonna say at first they weren't very good. I don't at first the whole time they were just it was just a pleasure to do. I would make them and I'd be like, I love this. And then I'd look at it like 3 days later and be like, meh. But the more I did it, the more I sort of got a sense of what I was doing. And I was posting it on Instagram, and
Right.
friends and colleagues were responding. And it just felt like I was doing something. I was pursuing the book's project in a different register or in a different medium.
Yes, I agree with you. It felt that way to me.
And so when I pitched the book to the press, I gave them like what I thought were my best collages, and they were these big. I used the Art Forum magazine, so these big square pages, a lot of those like very bright. And the editor came back and was like, "We love your proposal. We love what we've read. No collages. Like this is a 6x9 academic book. Like." And I was like, "I hear you. I hear you. What if I could give you some collages that worked in the like black and white 6x9 form?"
Yeah.
And he was like, "Yeah, do that, and then we'll see what the outside readers say."
Okay.
And the outside readers were, one was sort of ambivalent and one was enthusiastic, and
Yeah.
so they let me do it.
Oh, yeah. No, I loved it. I mean,
Thank you.
anytime somebody stretches something like that,
I
and
thought it was also
also I think that again, getting things from the subject, Barthes himself was painted things, right? And I think you have
yep,
a picture of one in there.
yes, yes. Yeah,
Uh,
he was this, in addition to being this major intellectual force in France in the 60s and 70s and sort of helping transform the American Academy in the 80s and 90s, he was what he called a Sunday painter, and he would just like make these paintings. And I went. This was it was a great excuse to get to go on a research trip. I was like, I'm going to go look at Barthes' paintings, and this is going to be a whole thing that we really haven't talked about.
in
And I
Paris.
saw them, and I was like, yeah, these are interesting. I don't really have much to say, and I knew I didn't have enough to say to make it like an important part of the book.
Right.
But it did feel like that sort of like recreational, amateur, artistic activity was an important part of the way that he relaxed, the way that he made space for his own thinking, the way that he made space for himself to, I want to say something like to think differently, but the way that he just sort of carved out space for himself that wasn't immediately subject to words
Mhm.
because he was using doing painting visual, and also not immediately subject to sort of the pressures of professional academic intellectual production. And
Sure.
one of the pleasures for me of doing the collages is like I can make a couple in a night, and they don't have to be good because I can make more the next day, right? It's
Sure.
not like they take tons of labor. I mean, there's a lot of labor that goes into preparing all the pieces,
Mhm.
but that's it's it is and it isn't like putting together a written document where I do have to prepare all the pieces, but getting them together into the document when you're writing is a lot more work than it is just
Oh, yeah.
positioning them.
Oh, right. Right. And you mentioned one of my favorite authors really is Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick, although I just read that one article about where she talks about, what is it? Reparative reading
Mhm,
and
mhm,
paranoid
and
reading,
paranoid
which I
reading.
just changed my life, really.
Yeah.
But she also did some work in
Yes, she had especially towards the end of her life, she did a lot of work on textiles. So she would weave and make these textiles, and she was very into Buddhism, so there's a lot of Buddhist imagery that she would stamp onto the textiles that she would make. She took a lot of or a couple of Proust quotes and would stamp them onto things. So when I read about this in the her posthumous book, The Weather and Proust, I was very taken with it, but this was years ago when I read this, and so but when I started doing this, I thought, "Oh, here's a way I can be like Eve."
Yeah, sure, why
You know?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Here I
Um,
was this a part of the book was taking these people who really inspired me and mimicking them and imitating them.
totally. Yeah, and that's kind of what the book is about.
Absolutely.
So, I really wanna get to some of these quotes by Barth, but,
Great.
so let me just jump to that. But
Yeah.
yeah, okay, so he talks about Michelet, right?
Mhm.
And there's this book which I bought, which seems fantastic, Satanism and Witchcraft.
Yes.
he says that the witch is progressive. The church is established in the world as a motionless, eternal essence. The witch is making the world itself. I don't know. This isn't an artful question. I'm just sort of lay it out there, and if you can riff on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the first thing I'll say is this is that first chapter where I talk about the figure of the witch is maybe my favorite chapter. It's the one that I expected that was most surprising to me. I didn't expect to be reading a book called Satanism and Witchcraft. I didn't expect to be like tracking images of the witch across
Right.
Barthes. Of I
Right.
didn't expect to be talking about magic, but I was really delighted to be once it
I
all
was too. I bought
got
the book.
got going, and thinking about the witch as this person who is excluded from sort of the main part of society and is thinks about the world in different terms,
Yeah.
and so I mean I love the image that he gives of her of the witch sort of going and speaking to the trees and speaking to the plants and realizing that like the plants can be medicine and that the antidote to the poison and the poison are this can be the same thing, and that there's this duality or this complexity to the world that sort of conventional or standard approaches efface or miss. And so she really approaches the world as something to be repeatedly created, repeatedly produced, rather
Great.
than the church who says, this is the eternal truth. This is how it is forever and ever. Amen. You know, and the witch is like, okay, well, you guys do that over there. I'm going to go over here. And what I loved is that like she thinking about the way she uses these plants as medicine to comfort, as painkillers, to help people sleep, all of these things that especially I mean, he's talking about the medieval witch, but especially in the modern age, we're all still suffering from insomnia, anxiety,
Yeah. Yeah.
worry. And that really helped me start thinking about the critic in somewhat different terms, or in terms that Bart had already seemed to be offering me of like
Hmm.
terms of not necessarily comfort, but creativity, complexity, excitement, energy, that like the world all of a sudden has an energy that isn't like dead and static and
Totally.
set already.
Yeah.
And I thought this is, and I'm also trying to engage this discussion among other English professors of like what is the function of criticism at the present time,
Right.
uh, and I thought, oh, this is a way of getting at some of these more positive affects, some of the more reparative things that that Cedric's talks about
Yeah.
in the essay that you mentioned, how to talk about this in new ways,
Right.
and also not be. This is getting back to the self help thing. Quite so like touchy feely about it. I mean,
Right.
plenty touchy feely. I mean, this is Bart, super touchy feely, but he's also super rigorous, and
Oh,
the
sure.
rigor and the rigor and the feeling go hand in hand. Uh,
Right. Well, I'm more, I may have more of an appetite for self-help than, but I just think when you just described that, it's so much a positive way of looking at the world to think of it of your life as it being something you're constantly producing rather than something that is weighed down by
yeah,
something from the past or
yeah,
something in the, I don't know. It's just a very, even just as a metaphor for what you're creating. I guess when you say it, it's hard to say it without sounding kind of to kind of yeah, she's making the world itself. Okay, let me go on to the next one.
great.
So there's a lot of things in here about, well, castration,
Mm,
hesitation, impotence. And here's a quote. I think this is bought from your book. A terrifying essence of passivity. Castration is paradoxically superactive. Its nothingness contaminates everything. Deficiency makes everything radiant. If you could place that in what he's talking, why that came up for him? Yes, please.
yeah. So he's at that point. This is from probably maybe his. I don't know if it says his most major work or his most important work. One of his most important works, SZ, which is a a line by line reading of a story by Balzac, and the story
Yes.
it
Sarah,
revolves. What's that? Yes,
Sarah, yeah.
so it revolves around a castrato who is
Which means a man who or someone who's castrated young, so for the purposes of being able to sing at a
exactly
high pitch his whole life.
exactly,
Yeah.
and the story it's a sort of story set within a story. So you have like a frame narrative, and then they're at a party, and then this one character tells another character at the party the story about this castrato who one of the other characters falls in love with, not realizing
Right.
that he's a castrato, and this once the character does realize that he's a castrato, this sort of panic and disgust and confusion runs throughout the scene and all the other characters, and it goes from the story being told to the frame narrative,
Yes.
and you have this energy that this disruptive energy that's disrupting all of the. Sorry, that's my dog.
Okay.
You have this. Speaking of disruptive energy,
Right.
Stevie. Hi. Sorry, she's a terror. So you have all this disruptive energy running throughout these settings that that upsets the structures organizing them, the structures by which
Hmm.
meaning and sort of social structures are made. So all of the things that keep male and female apart and that we use to sort of order the world in this way have now been evacuated, and all of the signs are kind of up for grabs. Or I guess I should say all the meanings of all the signs are up for
Yes.
grabs.
That's mm-hmm.
And where am I going with this? So you have this sort of negative image of castration releasing a kind of frenzied energy that I think he really wants to. I don't think he wants to harness it, but he wants to let it go. He wants that energy to come out, because
Mm-hmm.
then all of the signs in the world can take on new meanings,
Mm-hmm.
or not necessarily not wholly new meanings, but can be different and more complex than we thought. That like what it means to be a man or to be a woman is now not quite as stable and given as we thought it was.
Right. And in terms of a counter to what we all take in day to day, it's it's very different to put that first, to put impotence first, I think.
Mhm,
And when I read that, I was thinking, I don't know, y- you seem younger than I am, but when I was in school, we read The Sun Also Rises, by,
mhm.
which was, I was really shocked when I read, and I mean, now it's, I don't know what people think of it now. It's really, what do you, what do you say? The Jewish characters is really
Yeah.
gross in that book, but the way that Hemingway writes about the Jewish character is gross. But I was really profound. I was young, but I was really profoundly affected by that, writing from that position, right?
It's when I have to tell this, I always have to tell the story when someone mentions The Sun Also Rises. I read it in high school, and I was, of course, as a very good student, went into class. Halfway through the discussion, the teacher mentions that I can't remember the character is
Jake
impotent.
Barnes.
Yeah, Jake Barnes is impotent from this war wound. And I was like, oh, I didn't understand that. I didn't get what was going on.
I had the same experience. I didn't
Yeah.
get it until it was said in class. Same
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
And I think there's a real fear, especially in American culture, especially at this moment, of passivity, of impotence, as if not having power is
Shameful.
painful. Yeah.
I was
And
going to say, I said shameful, but painful.
shameful. Yeah. Well, and as if it doesn't have its own affordances, as if
Yes.
it doesn't allow you to think, as if having power is sort of the be all and end all, and that that having power doesn't have its own blind spots, as we've been watching, unfolding in real time over the past couple of months.
Right. Right.
Um, and so there's a, I don't want to, the shame is real, but I think there's also, if you can sort of confront impotence and think about it without being overwhelmed by your fear of it, then you can say, okay, what might impotence allow me to see or do? Where
Yeah.
what might it, as I said, what might it afford? I saw something the other day, like it was a T-shirt, I think, that said, "It takes strength to be gentle and kind."
Yeah.
And I thought of, like, I feel like that's relevant here in the sense that being impotent, you have to learn how to assert yourself and not, I mean, assert yourself. You have to learn how to have agency in different ways,
Right. I
or
would
believe
say
ways, or
I would say even more. So that book really kind of, now I don't think I could read a book now and it would affect me as much as that did then. But it's just kind of how can you live a full life worthy of literary fiction with this while you're in love with this woman who's right next to you and all around you, and not try to be non-castrated, but just be have that be a beautiful life itself. It's hard to say these things without sounding like cliche, but do you see what I'm saying?
yeah, absolutely. That I almost want to say, like, there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah.
There's more than one way to live a life.
Right, right.
We are only given certain models,
Yeah. Okay.
and I feel like, to get back to SZ and what Bart is doing in that book, is to show all of the codes and the all the sign systems and sign structures that tell us and that make up the models that we've been given. And he's like, may and I think his he doesn't quite go to this point in SZ. This is like sort of later in his work. He's like, if we can if we can see all the signs, then we can start to play with them. Then we can start to sort of wield them rather than have them wielded at us. Uh,
Right.
and that is that's a different kind of power that is not that doesn't quite fall into the, like, potent impotent binary.
I see what you mean. That's helpful. Thank you. That's very helpful. Another, and this is just the power of I didn't. So I hadn't read Cherasine ever, but I did after and while reading
Right.
your book. Yeah. And I've got that, and I've got the Michelet, and I also reread Sun Also Rises, to tell you the truth, because I hadn't read it in, 30 years. But so talking about the practice of language is this fascinating thing where Barthes starts talking about fashion, and he
Mm.
wants to talk about these languages of these practices of language like notation. Could you maybe provide an overview of that, of his interest in fashion? I'll just read one of it. There's so many quotes in there, but this is so I'm like, what is fashion? He says, fashion aims to rid human activity of its major scoria, alienation, boredom, uncertainty, or more fundamentally, impossibility, while retaining its essential quality of a pleasure and the reassuring clarity of a sign. How do you put those
Yeah,
words
that's
together?
I'm gonna come back to that. Is you like you dove in right in the into the deep end,
Right. Okay.
but so this book, the
The fashion system is that what it's called?
fashion system, yeah. It's like it's very much kind of understudied in, especially now that in the place that Bart has in the academy now is not as reading this book, it's very kind of scientific, it's very dry. He's trying to schematize everything. Okay, like, well, this is what a sweater means when it's buttoned. This is what a sweater means when it's not
Yeah.
buttoned. This is if the sweater has a collar. This is if the sweater doesn't have a collar. So there's
That's
lots of it.
interesting stuff. I don't know why that's not yeah, okay, go on. That's
Well, I
really
think it is super. It was interesting reading this book. I was both, like, totally enthralled and excited by how much he was noticing,
yes.
and then, like, kind of overwhelmed and bored by how much he was noticing,
Oh, I see.
or,
I got you.
or how much he was sort of pointing at and
I got
picking
you.
things apart.
Yeah.
And so he wants to show us that, like, actually fashion is not as spontaneous and sort of made out of thin air as we think it is, right? Like, in the actually, he wants to show us, like, what if we go to, like, The Devil Wears Prada, he shows, like, people are making this up. People
Yes.
are writing this,
Right.
and there's a language that they're using. It's a language that they write. It's a language that we are very adept in reading, but we're not as adept in noticing that we're reading. And So I think to get back to the quote that you read, where like it's really exciting to see something new, right? Like, okay, the new look this year is I keep seeing all the young kids are wearing like really wide pants, and like that's the new look. That's
Right.
exciting. I don't like it, but I'm middle aged, and
Yeah.
that's how it goes. But to note that excitement is being produced for you and is you're sort of subject to it, and that is it's a fantasy that is being sort of imposed on you. It might be a fantasy that you're enjoying, but it's dangerous as a fantasy that you don't aren't aware of as such, right?
Right.
And so his project is to say, like, look at how this fantasy gets produced, and look at how every 20 years, 25 years, the fashion, like it's a cycle, and that, you know, pants are pants are wide now, and 20 years are going to be thin again.
Right.
Right. And so noticing that there's a pattern and a kind of a non-spontaneity that is undergirding this feeling of this fantasy feeling of the spontaneous.
Right. And there are those select word, or what you call the practice would be notation or captioning, or that means so much to you. I don't think you realize it, but they frame it they make it come alive for me.
The ways in which the
This is
um,
if you want to look do the, and there's one part it's something like
yes,
if you want to do this,
do
look like
this, dress
this.
like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is what like the fashion magazine is saying without always saying it.
Right.
And so he wants to sort of unpack those. He wants you to notice the things that you're noticing, or the
Right.
things fashion is making you notice. So there's a sort of a double layer of notation there.
And
And
so that's an go ahead. Sorry.
I think that's one of the things that that book does, where he says, like, let's think about the collar open, the collar closed, the sweater, you know, 3/4 length, or the sleeve 3/4 length, the sleeves full length. Like these all mean things. And it made in what I was thinking about the whole time I was writing this chapter was when I'm we're close reading a passage, say in Wolf, and I talk about like, oh, what about this? What about the image of the crocus? Or
Mhm.
what about the rhythm of the sentence? And they're like, does that really mean something? And I'm like, what do you mean, does it really mean something? And at first they say, did she really mean that? And I say, I don't know. I can't ask her. She's dead. And I'm like, but like we can make it mean.
Yeah.
And isn't that exciting that we can make it mean? Uh,
Yeah.
and eventually they get on board. But
Right.
it's the hardest thing is to be like, hey, kids, excuse me, hey,
Yeah.
students,
Yeah. Young people. Yeah.
notice this.
Right.
Notice the things. And I think a lot of times the students are like, I didn't understand it, and therefore I'm doing it wrong. This her sentences are too long. I can't understand it. I'm like, well, what if you just say her sentences are very long? Why? What does that mean?
Mm. Yes. No, I agree.
You
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
And so getting them this happens all the time in Joyce. Why is he writing this way? Because especially in the second half of Ulysses, the style of each chapter changes dramatically
Right.
and drastically. And the students will come in so frustrated. Why is he writing it this way? And I always say, okay, let's take this rhetorical question and make it an actual question. Like, why is he writing this way? What what does this achieve? What is it? What's happening in the chapter? How might the way he's writing be related to what's happening in the chapter? How does it make you read differently?
Right.
And like they they get there. And I also say, like, your frustration is also you're allowed to be frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're like, you know.
All right. So I'm pretty first level here. Now that we raised this, I think that there's this. I don't know. Charles Taylor talked about this leveling,
Mhm.
where it's kind of to make distinctions is more and more of high low is more and more frowned of generally, and so that's the way I read Charles Taylor. But if and Joyce is the great
Mhm.
example of this. Is out of why is he writing this way? The first cynical, maybe shallow question about it is he's writing to be impressive and to be elite and hard and to be studied in the future. and that means he's less worthy of our attention. I don't know. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, first I would say, well, why do you think he's trying to impress us? Why do you think he's trying to be smart? And that would get into questions of Ireland as a
Mm,
colonized country,
yeah.
as a peripheral culture on the edge of Europe, and as trying to, especially taking something like the Odyssey and this foundational myth of Western culture, retelling it through the figure of a Jewish Irishman,
Mm,
uh, to bring the marginal into the center and to make people think for centuries about this one day in this one run of the mill day in Dublin is a gives some of that elitism or some of that difficulty a different significance, right? Like
I
it
agree with
has
that.
some
And
political cultural significance.
it also reminds me that isn't Ireland lost its language,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I mean,
Yeah,
talk about being marginalized or
right.
having something taken away from you, your very language.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So I would say that, and I don't know if this is quite what you were getting at, but it's something you gestured at the emails we exchanged. Whether this book is is making an argument that only Proust and
Right.
Barthes and Joyce are these high literary figures, high culture literary figures can make your life better. And I would say absolutely no.
Really?
That
Okay.
that they're the figures I go to. They're my literary archive because that's what
Right.
I studied and what I've been drawn to. But I think any written text that resonates with your life can do what it is, this sort of fantastic work of enlivening and energizing your experience
Hmm.
that I'm trying to describe. Mainly because I'm interested in the fact that literary texts are made out of language. That that you're reading. I'm trying to think of I always want to say Danielle Steele, but it's dating me a little bit.
Yeah.
But
No, that's the one I think of.
yeah,
Yeah.
like some romance novel
Right.
you read, like the here's my high cultural coming back in. Emma Bovary
Yeah.
also had, the 19th century versions of Danielle Steele and wanted to live her life that way. What I think she didn't do was quote the novels. She just imagined them. But if she
Ah.
quoted them and said, like, okay, Danielle Steele or whoever, this is the description of a lover, right? Here are the words that that this author used. Already you're working against a kind of static image because the words are never going to be totally stable. The words are never going to have only one meaning. So I think at one point I say, like, part of the fantasy of this book is like, what would have happened if Emma Bovary had read Bart rather than romance novels? And,
Right. Or, yeah, it was something like that. Right. Go
and
ahead.
so thinking about,
I
uh,
think, what if she had read Proust instead of,
yeah,
yeah.
or either.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
I think, and for me, the modernists come in because their play with language and their play with style is so obvious, right? Like you read Joyce and Woolf and you read Proust and you're like, oh, I see that they're obviously doing something. I might not like it. I might find it difficult. It might be annoying, but I see that they are making me notice the words on the page in a way that somebody like, or maybe Danielle Steele or more readable works don't ask us to do. Uh,
Right.
so that's maybe why maybe another justification for why my interest goes to the modernists. But I think as long
Hmm.
as you have some kind of if the thing that I want someone to take away from this book is that, like, literature on any level, on any sort of cultural level, high, low, is made out of words, and words don't sit still.
Right.
And that gives us a power, that gives us an agency. It is a kind of impotence because we can't say once and for all what something means, but it
Right.
also gives us a sort of expansiveness and
Richness.
allows us to read things that we thought, and when I say read, it allows us to interpret things that we thought we already knew what they meant.
Right. So, and this is actually, I think, one of the things that Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick talks about in that essay I read.
Mhm,
She talks about how she wasn't, I can't remember, but my take was when I'm growing up, for me, I wasn't football player or the potent
mhm,
person. And so I got a lot of credit for being very critical,
mhm,
right? And she says, I think she said that. And I said, wow, that is so true. And so what I'll, so I'm naturally do this. And I'll say literature does this. I was reading In Search of Lost Time and, it's really rich and everything, but I was thinking about Gilbert and Albertine on the beach, right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
I'm thinking, I'm old. This is kind of a good thing for me to do, right? But it's not anything nearly as compelling or lovely as being on the beach with the girls.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
would you? This is just my skeptical uh, response to everything. First, everything's not language because there's also just being on the beach with the
mhm,
girls, and
mhm.
secondly, that's clearly much better than reading.
Yeah, I thought a lot about how I was gonna respond to this because I can't say no. Obviously, being on the beach is really exciting,
Mm.
but there's a way in which being on the beach is also totally overwhelming and totally confusing, and that you have to sort of even in the moment of being on the beach, and actually Proust does this very well and because he talks about how like he can't figure out which features belong to which girls. They're all in sort of this sort of like miasma of desire, right?
Hmm.
And it's only if we can, I don't want to say take a step back, but at the same the description or a description, even if it's just to ourselves of what's happening on the beach, right? Like I'm on the beach. Here are all of these people with all their bodies that are totally stimulating me. I'm very excited. I don't really know what's happening, especially if you're in that adolescent age. And then that's when you start grasping at all of the cultural narratives that you've been given.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And so in order to even make sense of any of that, we need to start putting it into some kind of verbal framework. So it's not to say that like everything is language, but maybe that language is the most precise tool that we have, or one of the most precise tools we have to make sense of these overwhelming experiences. And that if we if we take the cultural scripts that we're given, if we take them too readily, then I think they actually shut down a lot of what's exciting about that moment. And
Very true.
and I'm looking for some scripts that can help us open it up.
Man, that is so good. That is
Oh,
so
thanks.
good. That is
Because
really good.
I was like,
I
he
mean,
makes a good point. I wanna do justice to it, but I also wanna
oh, it's really, really good. Yeah. I'll think about that. I appreciate that very much. I will think about. uh, Yeah, thank you for that. Just let me. I don't know if we have much time left, but there's so much in here. There's some.
I don't have anything till 11, so I can
I only have my. I can only do an hour for my.
right, I figured. But we might
um.
have to edit in there when my dog is
Okay.
freaking.
Well, one of the practices you talk about is that Barthes talked about is citation, right?
Mhm.
And I love this. So you would think, well, what could be more boring than citation? But he totally gave me a different way of looking at it. And your commentary did. Citar, citation, is the stamp of the heel, the torero's arch stance which summons the bull to the banderillero. Speaking of sun also rises.
Mhm, mhm,
Similarly, one similarly one cites the signified wealth to make it come forth while avoiding it in discourse. That was just so rich to me because just in practical terms, because so often you read something, you get the citation, that's the end of the discussion. That's
mhm.
like, go somewhere else. Anyway, just if you have a minute to comment on that.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a really interesting moment because he's saying like the citation is one way in which our culture, our received cultural scripts, this received cultural wisdom shapes our experience, right? Like, I know what wealth looks like, so you don't have to say these people are rich. I just know that if you say that they have X, Y, and Z, that all means wealth,
Okay.
right? And so, like, he doesn't even, and his point is that, like, we don't even always notice that that these are citational practices,
Right. I got you. So it's
right?
widening that. Yeah.
And so he then, less so in SZ, more later, because I sort of take that moment and say, yes, he's talking about sort of the imposition of cultural scripts onto us, but he also then wants to sort of, what's the word? I'm trying to, I use a certain word in there, in the book. He wants to, like, grab the energy of citation and use it. And like, he wants to appropriate. He wants to appropriate this action of citations giving things
To
meaning.
galvanize? No,
Yeah,
just
in order to galvanize these,
right.
to say, like, okay, well, like, does it have to mean wealth, or what else about wealth might it be saying? Right? There's always that, like, can we say
Right.
more about this?
Right.
So, as you're saying, citation is the end of the, go somewhere else. It's end of discussion. And I think one of the things he starts to do is say, like, what if citation is the beginning of the discussion?
Right. Yeah. Well, it is because I now have those books that I said, and also I've got 3 Barthes volumes now that
Oh, great.
on my book. Oh, they're on my bookshelf. What that
Yeah,
means, I don't know. But
I know exactly how that works.
anyway, John, thank you so much for talking to me today. And the book's great, and I appreciate it. And it's
You
a
are
long.
very welcome. Thank you for being such interested and engaged reader.
You're welcome. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Bye bye.